Hi everyone. Boy, that's a bright sun. I just want to quickly go over the key points from chapter 3 and 4 for methods. I'm sorry I don't have a digital copy here on the screen. I'm sure you all have one. But the key points, of course, you've read the chapter, you reviewed it. I just want to make sure that you understand the idea of now that we have understood the needs of L's, that teaching is most effective when you can go from whole to part. And what this means, if we actually take a real lesson, and let's say you're teaching 8th grade or 9th grade English and you have some L's in your class, or you just get all your L's by yourself, which is even better, and they have to read Romeo and Juliet. Now, in the olden days, we used to begin with vocabulary and introduce vocabulary and start from the small things and go up. Now we understand it's so much more effective to start from the whole and then go to the part. If you have a number of different cultures, maybe you have some Arab-speaking students, some Chinese students, some Southeast Asian, Eastern European, yada, yada, yada. If we can begin with the whole idea of Romeo and Juliet, you could start with showing parts of the movie and people say, oh my gosh, it ruins the story. It's not really about ruining the story. It's about giving these students an opportunity to learn the language. And we just talked a little bit about BICS and CALPS, and they have their BICS, they have their superficial language and social skills, but we need them to get those academic cognitive skills, their reading and writing skills. If you start with the whole and give them the whole picture and maybe show them parts of the movie of Romeo and Juliet and tell them the story of star-crossed lovers and what this means. If you don't know the story, that's okay, but you get the idea. Also, if you can get the book in their L1, and this is great, and just kind of do the summary of this idea of this young guy and this young girl, and their families hate each other, but they fall in love, and what this means. So this is what the chapter talks about, is let's start from the whole and then back up and go down to the parts. The book gives the example of, for example, teaching the farm. And if you think about younger learners and teaching the farm and farm animals, the same thing is if you begin with the bigger idea and maybe show, and of course we want things that are context rich, show videos and films of farms and working farms and animals, and then maybe go backwards to whatever particular target you're going to. Again, going from whole to part. This for sure will be on your certification exam, and you may even be asked to give an example. And this is what you would begin with. If, for example, you're working on let's say colors, you have an entering group of students. You begin with the whole idea, and you could do a story of the rainbow and read this idea of rainbow and show pictures of rainbow, and then go back and start with the particular colors of red, blue, yellow. So you're going to start with a whole idea, engage those learners. It's much more interesting to hear the story, see the pictures, to even if they can't understand fully, to have that teacher in a discussion group rather than sitting there by themselves trying to deal with 1 or 2 vocabulary words. Chapter 4 talks about the idea of including content, and this is a sheltered English, and this is when we include content in our instruction. So for example, maybe the social studies, you have some 4th grade students, social studies teacher says, oh my goodness, we have to talk about maybe US states and I don't know, the states of Republicans and Democrats. And so you're going to kind of go and take those students and you're going to shelter that English along with the content. And you're going to teach the content along with the language skills. And you, as much as we can, kind of want to add those things and always bring those things together and take advantage when possible. The book talks about scaffolding, that's Bruner, and we want to give opportunities for using pictures and maps and videos and conversation and using each other and realia. So again, we use that to help scaffold to hit that zone of proximal development where they're really in that target and they're learning language and content at the same time. Be sure you review the section in the textbook. I think it begins on page 106. It talks about content-based ESL and sheltered English. Content-based ESL is the idea that you're teaching the subject along with English for those students. And the challenge is that it's no problem if you're in 1st and 2nd grade, but you start getting up to 10th and 11th grade and you're getting into algebra and geometry and you're dealing with language issues, that becomes a real challenge. And sometimes we have a co-teacher along with a language teacher. Then this is when we go kind of to the idea of sheltered English, where we're just using the content of those classes to help teach the language rather than teaching the content. Remember, we don't want to teach content. We need to teach English language. Those students need to become proficient before they start learning the English language. This is why sheltered English is a little bit more effective. So what you're doing is, let's go back to our social studies class. You're teaching English language, you're teaching English, but you're using aspects of those social studies words and the activities to help teach English language. So review that area of chapter 106, 107, 108. You'll certainly come across sheltered English along with those other aspects. You don't need to. You won't come across CALA that's in there, so you can ignore that. I do also want to take a minute to make sure that you understand the difference between bilingual ed and TESOL. We've talked about this a number of times, but just as a reminder, bilingual education, you have your bilingual ed and your target students all sharing the same L1. So if you're Spanish, the bilingual ed teacher is proficient in Spanish, the students all speak Spanish, so the teaching takes place in the heritage language. So it takes place in Spanish for the target language of English. All classes are in the heritage language. You take math in Spanish, you take English in Spanish, you take social studies in Spanish. In TESOL, the teacher does not share the heritage language because there's a lot of different languages, and the target language is used to teach. So the teacher uses English, and the English class is in English, math class is in English, Spanish class is in English. Everything's in English. Bilingual class, a bilingual program, it's great because you preserve the L1 and you keep content going. But English is slow to come. Boy, that light's funny. In the TESOL program, content's slow to come because everything's in English, but the language, English, comes much faster. So I just want a little reminder of those two differences. You will need to be familiar with SIOP on page 118, and it begins on 117. And this is Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. That may come up on your test. Again, these acronyms are unbelievable. This is just the idea of sheltered English. This is the idea that we're using the information from the content class as kind of a source for our English teaching. But you're going to know all of this. They say, well, this is really important because we use these strategies, such as, and you see this on page 118, making sure that we, we have supplemental materials such as graphs and models. Well, of course, we know that. We need a context rich. We make input comprehensible. Well, of course, we already know that through Krashen. If it's not meaningful, then students aren't going to learn it. We have specific strategies, of course, like cooperative learning and think, pair, shares. We plan for interaction. Of course, Halliday says interaction has to be social. This is everything we already know in our field, but they call it, again, SIOP is sheltered instruction. And then this is kind of like the protocol, you know, the way that we go ahead and do this. So you come across this and you think, oh my goodness, what is this? You already know it. It's just a funny acronym to describe it. This is the way that we address our learners' needs. This is the way that we best teach, best practices. We build rapport. We make sure we're well planned. We have context-rich activities. We have pictures. We have videos. We are demonstrative. We use TPR. We have realia. We have a lot of social interactions. Our students do more of the talking. Of course, we need that output. We have pair shares. We have collaborative learning. This is everything we do. We connect the content to their background. We do. We want to, you let them use their L1, talk about their families, bring in their cultures. This is everything we do. Just make sure you understand it. So this is an important the important chapter to read and understand. That's it. See you later.